Hello and welcome to N332 Driving in Spain. I'm Mark Nolan, and this is just a little bit of an update for April about some of the things that we're going to be talking about on the N332 website and Facebook page and some of the articles that we've produced. It is, at this particular moment in time, a little bit late for April because we're almost halfway through the month, but it's an important week in which I'm recording this, so I wanted to do it now anyway. I also want to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to in the past month or so, or since the last time we spoke. But first of all, we'll talk about what's happening in terms of what we're going to be publishing and the information we're going to be sharing this month. We've already had Easter, of course, and Easter is one of the busiest times on the roads. And it didn't surprise this year. It was particularly busy, busier than usual in many places and at many times. One of the things about Easter is it's also kind of like an indicator for the summer. So if Easter in Spain is busy, then typically summer in Spain is busy. And because it was busier this year, the likelihood is we're heading towards a busier summer, which brings lots of issues on the roads. So we started off the month talking about busy roads and holiday traffic and problems, for example, like tourists driving on Spanish roads. Not that tourists are a problem, before you jump in and think the worst of what I'm saying. But what it is, we have unfamiliar vehicles because a lot of them hire cars. We have unfamiliar roads, different driving habits, hesitation, pauses, drivers getting lost. We have all kinds of things. And those drivers who are used to the road also have to deal with unusual aspects. Now, the answer is, of course, everyone has a right to be there and carry on and do their business. But we just have to be a little bit patient, or more patient than usual. And we should be patient anyway, but we have to be a little bit more patient and allow for strange incidences, let's just say, and vehicles doing things which may seem a little bit unusual. So at busy times, that's all we have to do. Just be a little bit patient and give everybody else a little bit more space and a little bit more time. So that was really what we were talking about for the first month of the first week, I should say, of the month. And I'm going to talk about the second thing, which we're actually talking about right now. I'm going to talk about that in a moment because I'm just going to jump forward and just explain what's coming up after this particular period. So as we're looking towards the third and fourth week of the month, we're going to be looking at things like spring wildlife, where, again, not unlike tourists, we have to expect the unexpected. And we also have to give them space, and we have to give them time, and we have to slow down as well, because spring, of course, brings a lot of new life into this world. So we have lots of young animals, and they're very unpredictable. And even though some of the elder animals sometimes lose what road sense they've developed, it's not quite so easy for them to pass on the skills to the younger animals. So young animals are particularly vulnerable and particularly unpredictable. So we need to be cautious of that and just keep a sharp eye out, particularly in areas such as rural roads. And from dawn to dusk is the worst time, by the way, because the animals tend to wander onto the road when the roads are quieted. They're not stupid, of course. So when they see traffic, they know, generally speaking, that it's a problem area and they avoid it. But when the traffic starts to go a little bit less than would be normal, such as at night, then they wander innocently onto the road. So it can be a little bit of a surprise for them and for drivers as well. We're also bringing together other spring changes, seasonal changes, particularly for spring, which includes things like light and temperature and the road use, as well as mixed conditions. And of course, within that, we have to bring in things like pollen, which is a particular problem for a lot of people at this time of year, myself included, as it happens. And it can cause problems because of things like runny noses or runny eyes or itchy eyes. But it can also cause problems because some of the medication which you take to combat those symptoms doesn't interact very well with driving either, and it can cause drowsiness and it can cause slower responses. So pollen is a big problem, more than many people might think. But there are also hidden hazards on the roads, such as the surface changes. Because as the winter starts to die down, for example, and during the winter we have lots more rain about, as we come to spring, we still have rain, and it tends to be heavier downpours and in between dry spells. And it's a problem because when you have a dry spell and the road dries, dust and pollen and other small material items land on the road. And then when the rain or the water goes on top of that, it makes it particularly slippy. So it is a particularly hazardous time, as well as the weather changes. So we're going to be talking about hidden hazards as well, and also limited visibility, because of course trees start to blossom and bloom and they block the views, sometimes on roads and sometimes at junctions. So we just need to be aware of that as well. At the end of the month, we return to new drivers and visitors because, as I mentioned, we get towards summer very soon. So we just want to talk a little bit about that and how to deal with the unfamiliarity and hesitation, and in particular how to deal with it in the sense of coexistence, because everybody has a right to use the roads, and there's no reason why any one vehicle has priority in any particular space than another. So we just need to deal with them in the sense that, as I said before, slow down, give everyone more space, more time. That's it. And we also then talk about things like planning road journeys, because you really, if you're going on a long journey, particularly, but a short journey as well, but long particularly, you really need to plan the journey. So you need to look at things like problems on the road that might be anticipated. So roadworks, for example, is one thing, diversions, busy spells, busy spots, but also the weather. So you need to plan this in advance, ideally, and then you can take action if anything happens to guide you on a better route. Yes, of course, a lot of GPS route planning software does that as well, but it's better if you've got a familiarity yourself, because otherwise you could end up being exactly like the sort of people we've just been talking about, the tourists who are on unfamiliar roads and a little bit lost and are hesitant. So we can all end up in that situation. So it's important to plan. So we talk about that as well. And then we talk about fatigue, and particularly fatigue on familiar roads, because fatigue is a big problem as well. If you're feeling tired or not rested, it causes many, many problems. And for those of you who have maybe perhaps seen some of the talks or listened to information or watched videos about some of the talks we do, we have alcohol and drugs goggles, which we put on people so that they can see what it's like to be drink driving or having consumed drugs and driving. But one of those goggles also mimics fatigue, and you can see then how fatigue actually affects driving. But there's also fatigue on familiar roads, because if we go along familiar roads, which many of us do, whether we're commuting to work, for example, or going to our favorite shopping center or anywhere which we're sort of used to, then we get used to that route as well. So we get used to everything on that route, the junctions and the signs and the speeds. But that's not always a good thing. In fact, it's rarely a good thing, because the brain starts to learn that route as well, and the brain basically stops looking. I'm not going to talk about this in any more detail at the moment, because I want to save this. This is kind of towards the end of the month we talk about this. I want to save this for next month and talk about that in more detail, about what the brain does on familiar roads. But there is a little article coming up at the end of the month. But what I want to talk about is to jump back to this week, which is week commencing the 13th of April, because it's a very important week on the roads of Spain, and in fact the roads of Europe, because it's what we commonly refer to as Speed Week. And what it actually is a speed awareness campaign week, which is coordinated by RoadPol, which is the European Road Traffic Policing Association. So it occurs across most European countries at the same time. So during the course of this week, most of Europe will be having a campaign focusing on speed. And that campaign focuses on information and awareness, why you shouldn't speed, why you shouldn't break the speed limit, And it also focuses on enforcement and fines. So there will be speed checks across the whole continent at random times during the course of this week, more than usual, but also in Spain, which is where we're really dealing with in terms of N332. So there will be intensified checks on speed, and that includes checks from the air, checks from the roadside, radars as well, a lot of the automated radars, which will just send you the fine through the post so you don't even get stopped by the police or the Guardia Civil. But there will be a clampdown in lots and lots of random places. Speed, we're talking about in a few articles this week, is actually a combination of multiple problems. And one of the things that we talk about in particular is how on roads outside of towns, again, this is based on the statistics, which are the most recent statistics, which were produced in February, but it's not actually different to usual. Outside towns, the most common collision, the most common incident is vehicles leaving the road. So more often than not, there's only a single vehicle involved. And more often than not, there is something like, for example, a bend. And when something like that happens, more often than not, the contributing factor, or the major contributing factor, is deemed as being speed, because cars approach these bends at an inappropriate speed, and that's why single vehicle collisions occur as these vehicles leave the road. So the way of dealing with that is, of course, to slow down and make sure you maintain appropriate speed at all times. But it's not quite as easy as that, because at the end of the day, yes, that is what should be happening, but humans are humans, and it is very easy to go over the speed limit, and it is very easy to end up in a situation like that where a vehicle has left the road. So there are other factors involved, which we actually refer to as latent conditions. That's a technical term, which we refer to. So there are other factors involved which should be improved as well to try and ease that problem. But at the end of the day, from a driver's point of view, the important thing is to slow down. Now, one of the strange concepts of speed, which, again, I'm going to talk about this another time because I want to focus on it specifically. One of the strangest concepts of speed is it's believed that speed is, or is not, the problem. And to an extent, that's kind of a misconception that speed is and is not the problem, because what is more of a problem when it comes to speed isn't actually when you look at the speedometer and you see what speed the vehicle is claiming to be doing, because speedometers lie, by the way. I mentioned this before. When you look at your speedo and you see what it's actually presenting, that is not the true speed. Speedometers do lie, and that's why speed cameras and radars have a margin of error, so that they can adapt to that. So the margin of error, again, that's another kind of myth and another confusion. People think, oh, well, yes, 50 kilometers an hour, but I'm allowed to go 57 or whatever they think. Is not true. 50 is the limit. 50 is the limit. It doesn't mean you should go at 50, because, that is the limit, not a target. So you could well go lower, but it absolutely means you must not ever go above that limit. 50 is the limit, or whatever the limit might be. And part of it is because speedos do lie. In actual fact, a little snippet that I talk about in another context or another time, which I'll just throw in here. There is a part of your vehicle that, whatever speed you're doing, the part of that vehicle is actually not moving ever. It is traveling at a speed of 0. And there's also a part of your vehicle which is traveling at double the speed that you believe the vehicle is traveling at. So if we use 50 kilometers an hour as the example I've just mentioned, there is a part of your car which is traveling at 0, and there is a part of your car which is actually traveling at 100 kilometers an hour. Now, that might sound like a strange thing to say. In fact, I'll give this more attention afterwards, but I'm basically talking about the wheels. And if you want to study geometry, for example, if you have a knowledge of it, then what you'll understand is the tire base, the bit which is touching the road, is moving at 0 kilometers an hour. It is stationary, because if it was moving, you'd be skidding. The tyre wouldn't have traction. So the actual bit of the tyre which is making contact with the road is not moving. And at the opposite end of the wheel of geometry, the very top bit, that is travelling at double the speed of the centre. So that part is travelling at double whatever the vehicle says. And cars, as they drive along, they bounce up and down because of the road conditions. So as they bounce up and down, that changes. And if you think about some people might remember the older vehicles, for example, very old cars. And if you looked at the speedo, you would see the speedo actually jiggling all the time. And that's the reason why these days digital speedos don't do that. They give you what is a perceived correct speed at any one time. But the idea still happens. It still happens. The vehicle bounces. So your vehicle is actually traveling at different speeds constantly. It's fluctuating. I didn't intend to talk about that at this moment, but anyway, I did. We'll talk about it another time in more detail. But what I wanted to talk about is speed, because speed is actually a bit of an illusion, because first and foremost, people believe that the faster you go, the quicker that you'll get somewhere. And that is simply not true. And I could give you examples, but if, for example, you're traveling at 100 kilometers down the motorway and then suddenly you increase to 120, and if you've got your sat-nav programmed, you'll see that it doesn't actually change the arrival time or the journey time. And that's all related to pace. So it's the pace of the vehicles doing rather than the speed. So as you actually get to those higher speeds, the time you save is literally minimal. So you don't get there any quicker. That's the fact. But the other thing about speed and the illusion of speed is that what speed does, and this is where I say speed is not the problem as such, or it is or it isn't, because what speed does is the faster you go, it compresses time, and time is the factor. And it's a factor which is often not understood or ignored. So as I just mentioned, that the faster you go, you don't actually get there any quicker. So you think that because you're going faster, you will get there quicker, but time says otherwise. And you will, as I say, you will see that on your GPS. But also it compresses time. And when you think of, we'll stick with 50 kilometers an hour, just as an example. A vehicle traveling at 50 kilometers an hour travels around about 14 meters every single second. 14 meters is about, well, it's longer than the length of a tennis court, for example. It's about the equivalent of, if you imagine two fully grown giraffes, lay on the road. So you go head to toe. So two full length giraffes. Then you're talking about 14 meters. So that's the sort of distance that a car or a vehicle traveling at 50 kilometers an hour travels every single second. One of the problems we have with driving is biological. And we have the problem, and there's lots of things I can talk about and tell you about, which are to do with things like neuroscience and psychology as well, to an extent, but more neuroscience on this sense. But it's biological. And the problem is, whenever we decide that something needs to happen, we don't actually decide that as such. Our brain decides that. And our brain, more often than not, runs on autopilot. And when we see or believe that we see a situation, such as something on the road, and we think we need to stop or we need to slow down, it takes an amount of time for that message to be processed by the brain, for the brain to then send the signals to the appropriate parts of the body to actually carry out the process of slowing down or stopping. So usually the feet are involved, for example, applying the brakes, or it could be the hands if it's hand-based brakes. So there's a time from the moment that we believe that we see something that takes us into a situation where we feel we must take action, i.e. slowing down or stopping, and when we actually then start to make that process happen. And you will know of this already. It's commonly referred to as the reaction time. The problem is the reaction time increases or improves as you go from your younger years to around about your 30s, and early 30s is where the reaction time peaks. And then it starts to decline again from early 30s onwards. And it does vary for many different reasons and many different people and things like, for example, and I'm not going to talk about this today either, alcohol, for example, and drugs, for example, they slow down the entire process of reacting. But all those things aside, in very general terms, it takes about a second for the brain to actually realize that we want to do something, and then for it to tell our body parts to do whatever we want them to do. So if we see something and think, okay, I better stop, it will take a second for the brain to actually process that and then send a signal to our feet or our hands to actually make that happen and make us start enacting the stop. Now, I've just said that at 50 kilometers an hour, a vehicle travels around 14 meters, just slightly less actually, around 14 meters every second, 2 giraffes, slightly more than a tennis court every single second. So the problem is, if you're traveling at 50 kilometers an hour, your vehicle will cover that distance at the time from when you say to yourself, we need to stop, and you're actually starting to make that maneuver. This, remember though, is only the reaction time. It is not the actual stopping distance. And if anything occurs within that distance, 14 meters in the example that we're talking about, then there is literally nothing that can be done to avoid a collision, because that's biology. That's the brain hasn't got the time to actually react and to actually deal with that. So if anything occurs, again, we'll carry on with the 50 kilometers an hour example. If anything occurs within that 14 meters from your vehicle, you cannot stop, you cannot avoid it. And no amount of skill or training or observation, nothing can change that, because it is biology. It is built in to the human system. So you can't change it. You literally cannot change it. Of course, that distance increases the faster you go and decreases the slower you go. So when I'm talking about time being a more important factor than speed, if we just sort of look at that, for example, so 50 kilometers an hour, and what we have is 14 meters of space where nothing can be done if anything happens in that space. If we just halve that speed, for example, 25 kilometers an hour, and we can't just instantly sort of half and multiply because there's various other factors as well, but we're just working in simple terms. If we halve that to 25 kilometers an hour, then we can safely say 7 meters every second is what's covered. So what that means is at 25 kilometers an hour, it will take us a second still, but our vehicle will only travel 7 meters during that second. So if we're traveling at 25 kilometers an hour and a child steps out 10 kilometers away, for example, we are able to react in time. Still doesn't necessarily mean we'll stop in time, because if that child has stepped out at 10 meters away and we've started to brake after the second, so we're starting to brake at 7 meters, we've still only got 3 meters before we actually impact. However, there is also a chance that we will stop. And if we're not able to stop, the speed will be much slower at collision. So the child most likely will survive. But if we're traveling at 50 kilometers an hour and that same child steps out at 10 meters away, there is no way, not only that we can stop, there is no way we can even react in that time. So we will hit that child at 50 kilometers an hour. And it is highly likely that child will not survive. So that is the difference. It's not the speed as such, it's the time in which we as humans need to react. And the faster we go, the more of that time, the more of that space is taken up. So it is absolutely crucial to slow down. And speed limits are not there for fun, nor are they targets. They are there to allow us, hopefully, to be able to react in a better time and therefore hopefully avoid more serious collisions. And in particular, in towns and cities and residential areas where speed limits are now reduced, that is the reason, because vulnerable road users are precisely that. They are vulnerable pedestrians, cyclists, e-scooter riders. They are not afforded the same protection as cars or buses or trucks or vans, because those vehicles have huge, super strong metal cages which are designed to absorb impact before it actually reaches the human body. These are the road users, pedestrians, cyclists, e-scooter riders, moped riders, motorcycle riders. They're extremely vulnerable. They don't have that same protection. It is simply the human body versus machine. And that machine is designed to absorb impact, but only in the vehicle. And when I said before about the latest figures being released in February, these are global figures, by the way, we can see that the idea is the road to zero, and there needs to be zero fatalities on the roads. There needs to be zero collisions as well, ideally. But the figures of, it's referred to as KSI, killed or seriously injured. The figures of KSI are not declining. They're stagnating. They're pretty much level. But to put that into context of vehicles getting safer, that means they're actually increasing if you go for the, let's say, seasonally adjusted figures, as is a common phrase. Now, yes, there are more vehicles on the road as well. But one of the biggest problems that is occurring is an increase in fatalities and serious injuries, an increase in the KSI figure for people who are not inside vehicles. So in other words, vulnerable road users, in other words, pedestrians, cyclists, e-scooter riders, amongst others. So the trend is absolutely being booked, if you like, by vulnerable road users having an increase in the KSI figures because they are being killed and seriously injured by other vehicles. And those other vehicles have the protection. And the way that we can actually resolve that and make that a little bit better is, can you guess, by allowing ourselves more time to react, by allowing ourselves more time to slow down, to brake, to take evasive action, to avoid vulnerable road users and to overtake safely. And this is the absolute magic message, because the way that we create that time is to slow down. It is as simple as that. Cars can go extremely fast at the hands of humans. And it's a human factor which is making them go faster, inappropriately faster, driving at inappropriate speeds. It is up to the driver to slow down. And yes, there are latent conditions in this situation as well. One of the biggest example of a latent condition is why are cars, for example, designed so that they can go faster than the speed limit? That's changing a little bit now with speed limiters being introduced as well. But why were cars manufactured so that they could travel at speeds which are neither appropriate nor legal? So that's a latent condition. But the human, the driver, has the power within them to control that, the power to drive slowly. So it's still in the hands of the humans, but humans are humans and they will go over the speed limit. So I'm not going to dwell on this any longer now. I'm going to leave it there for this particular little chat. But the whole point is, and the message that I wanted to say really is that particularly as we're in this speed week, as I described it, the speed awareness week coordinated by RoadPol, then the answer is quite simply to slow down. So please be a little bit considerate for everybody else on the road. Keep an eye on your speed. You don't have to do the speed limit. Slower is better. Don't think that you'll get there any quicker by going faster, because you won't. And don't fall into the trap of feeling safer than you are in your metal box, because although you might actually be safer, other road users are not. So please slow down. I was going to also, as I said at the start, just mention a little bit about what we've been up to, and I'm going to do this again as kind of like just another update of what we've been up to, because there's things which have been happening in the background for the last, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, something like that. And I do want to give those a little bit more focus, but we've been concentrating on a few things like developing content which actually deals more with explaining things like speed and the illusion of speed and the misconception of speed as well. So we're actually creating more content which explains more about problems on the road and why we drive the way that we do. There's a book out, Understanding, which is all about the psychology and neuroscience of driving, which is out now. You can get that on Amazon and order it in all good bookshops. Written by me, by the way, Mark Nolan. If you go to Amazon, just look for Mark Nolan and you'll find quite a few books under my name. N332 as well, you can search for that. But you can find everything that I've done under Mark Nolan. So we're talking about the psychology, and we've been developing content like that as well. So I'm going to talk in more detail about that, because we've also been dealing with similar content creation, articles and other things for younger people, starting at the very young children, and then teenagers and young adults as well. So we've got lots of content specifically for all age groups. I'll talk about that another time, as I say. And we've been out and about. We've been to various talks and chats in various areas and a couple of expos. We've literally just, the weekend just prior to recording this, so not necessarily the weekend when you're listening, we've just finished the Expo Torrevieja, which was extremely busy, certainly on the second day, the Sunday. And thanks to everyone who came along and spoke to us there. It was really nice to see you and to speak to you. So we've just done that as well. And I think that's back in November, although I may have just actually ruined a surprise by telling you that, because I don't think they've made that public yet. But anyway, if that's not public, just ignore it. Pretend I haven't said it. If it is public, then we'll see you there in November. We've also been to Javier and done a lifestyle expo there, which was a great event too. So it's nice to catch up and meet with many people out and about as well. And we have been doing various talks to various groups and associations, which we've pretty much now concluded for the season, because for those of you who have been with us since the very start, which is over 11 years now, can you believe that? And I know a couple of people came to the expo and basically just sort of reminded us of that by saying, oh, I've been with you since the start. And honestly, thank you for that. That's why we do what we do, and we really appreciate the fact that you take the time and come and tell us that. So anyway, for those who have been with us from the start, you'll know that we do the talks and the visits seasonally in spring and autumn. So we've just come to the end pretty much of the spring talks. Oh, we've been to schools as well as part of the other thing. Project Understanding is what that's called. So there's another little spoiler secret for you. If you Google Project Understanding, or projectunderstanding.eu, if you want to go straight there, you'll find what I'm talking about before I actually tell you. I'm spoiling everything today. I'm giving you all these secrets. Anyway, so yes, we've been to schools as well. And I've just lost my thread. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. So we're back in autumn, and we've got quite a few talks lined up in various areas already. But as always, if you want to get in touch with us and want us to come and visit you and your group, then we're happy to discuss that as well. And you can contact us via the website n332.es, or send an email to news@n332.es, and that will come to us as well. Just give us a little bit of information as to who you are, where you are, what you're sort of looking at in terms of us visiting, and then we'll see if we can come to some agreement for this coming autumn. We've got a few lined up already, but there's still a few gaps. So by all means, get in touch, and then we'll see what we can do. That's it for this little update. I shall leave you in peace, and hopefully see you out and about very soon. Stay safe, and remember to keep your eye on the speed, because it's not necessarily the speed that's the problem. Remember, it's the time, and it's the reaction time. And just think about that. 2 giraffes or 14 meters, that's the distance that you'll travel in 1 second at 50 kilometers an hour. So that is the distance that your vehicle will cover before your brain even tries to react. And that's in optimum conditions, by the way. Many things affect that, as I said, alcohol and drugs, but also things like I mentioned a short while ago, like pollen and pollen medication. They affect reaction time. So that time and that distance becomes greater. So keep your eye on your speed. Please keep your eye on the distance and just monitor that a little bit. And you'll be quite surprised of how far it actually is to go 14 meters and how much time that you do not have to react when you're traveling at higher speed. So just have a little look at that as you're out about. Any questions, any answers? Sorry, I just remembered. At Export Arbeca, there were quite a lot of questions, of course. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little list of many of the questions that were asked, and we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A session like this, an audio Q&A session. So I answered the questions at the time. We both, myself and Francisco were there. We both answered all of the questions at the time, but what we're going to do is just do a little bit of a session here. So I'll tell you what the most popular questions were, and then I'll answer them here. So we got them on record as well. So that'll come, and probably towards the end of this month we'll do that, and then I promise I will try and keep you updated more with what's going on now that the first season of the year is over. So we've got more time to focus on the content which goes directly to you, like this, the audio content, which you can catch up on the website, n332.es, and also on your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, any podcast platform, pretty much. And also YouTube as well. You can listen to audio on YouTube. Right. That is enough talk for me for this day. Have a fantastic rest of this April. Remember to follow us on those podcast platforms or wherever you get your audio content so that you then get alerted when we post things, and visit the website n332.es. You can sign up for the periodic or daily updates, and send any questions you have to news@n332.es. Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of the month. Stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.